Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys, and this is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. And today it's your channel for my opinion on technical expertise versus the skill of teaching. And when do you get qualified to become a teacher? Right after this. Now this is part 2 of a quick thoughts video where the first part dealt with the idea of photography as a science versus an art. Really, how much technical knowledge do you need to be good at photography? It was all inspired, by the way, by a comment where I had made a video about an Olympus camera and diffraction on Olympus cameras. And without getting too technical, I asked the question, why is this happening in this system? One of the comments was, if you don't understand it, you shouldn't be teaching others. And I strongly disagree with that. By the way, I teach macro photography, but I want to talk about what qualifies me to teach it and should I be teaching it? Let me know down in the comments. We're going to talk about it today because I'm going to talk about this idea of what do you need to know to teach a subject. Now, this can relate to anything. I'm going to try to keep it to photography, and I'm going to touch on wildlife photography. So hang around to the end and we'll talk about that as well. So let's just start with this myth that you have to be an expert to teach something. It sounds like, yeah, you probably should, but I want to challenge you real quick. I can dispel that myth pretty quickly. As we think about the best teachers we've ever had, and we think about their skill level or their knowledge of subject. So I'm going to give you two quick examples. I'm going to talk about the first, one of the best teachers, one that I can remember from a childhood where I went to many, many schools and had dozens and dozens of teachers, Mrs. Brown in 7th grade. I always wanted to be there. I was always interested in what she said. She had me engaged as a student. Mrs. Brown was great. I have no idea how smart she was. I have no idea what her level of education was. What I do know is that when she spoke, I listened and she made it easy for me to learn. That is a skill of a great teacher. I want to talk about one of the worst teachers I ever had, which is a guy that I think I had in 11th grade in a math class, and I think he was a genius. I think he was really, really, really smart, probably a mathematician. I don't know that I learned anything in the time that I was in that classroom. The classroom didn't have a good environment. People didn't pay attention. Nobody really cared to be there. The way he spoke was above the class. He wasn't able to cater the material to the class, and as students, we just didn't care and we didn't want to be there. But I believe he was highly educated. So the amount of education is really not what we're talking about. It's the ability to teach. Now, does this mean that anybody can teach anything to anybody? No. So I think we have to have some foundation here. So let's just talk about foundational knowledge. Is there foundational knowledge for photography? And I would say yes. Before we teach anybody, even a beginner, some of the foundations we should probably understand are, how does the camera work? I mean, without getting too advanced, but how does the camera physically work? How does the lens work? How does the opening to the lens work? How does it relate to the sensor? Things like that. We should have a pretty good understanding of exposure and what that means. Ideas like the exposure triangle, even though they can be a little bit different depending on who you talk to, but a basic understanding of shutter speed and aperture, and then in digital photography, ISO or noise, and also ambient light and how that all factors into the equation. So we should have a really good understanding of that. We should understand focus and the modes that different cameras use, and we should understand metering. I think we can all agree that those are pretty basic principles when it comes to the actual way a camera works. There's also an artistic side to this, so we should understand composition and maybe have a basic understanding of color theory. And with that basic foundation, I can probably teach a beginner photography in a genre that I'm comfortable teaching. So for me, wildlife photography. Is there an amount of time that I need to be doing that? Well, I thought about this for a while and I thought, a year, maybe not. Like maybe we're not ready at a year to teach other people, but by 5 years, if I'm intellectually curious, if I'm doing the genre, if I'm actually participating in it actively, a few times a week, I'm out there doing photography, I'm getting anecdotal experience, I'm getting my hands on, I'm getting comfortable with it, and I'm also learning in the process. So I'm spending time watching YouTube, reading a video, maybe learning from an expert. After about 5 years, I would say most people could teach beginners with one caveat. If they're a good teacher. And I think that is way more important than the rest of the stuff. So more important than the book knowledge, more important than going to 4 years and getting a degree in photography. Are those things unimportant? No, but what is more important is the skill of the person delivering the information versus the amount of information that the person has. I believe that to be true. Now, you can argue with me down in the comments already if you already disagree with my premise, but to teach an expert might be a little bit different, or to teach an advanced photographer. So if you're taking somebody that's been doing it for a couple years and wants to be better, and you're going to teach them how to be better. Now I think you're looking at 7 to 10 years of experience might be about right. I don't know. Maybe 7 to 10. Because when you're teaching people who now have the basics, you've got to get them to the next level. And that requires a lot more time in the field specific to your genre. It requires a lot more trial and error on your own part. And that just takes time. We're not talking about the technical knowledge. Remember, we're talking about time and experience. It takes time to learn those things yourself, and you have to be doing it regularly. So 7 years of very passive, inconsistent, not really what I'm talking about. Consistent work over 7 years, maybe up to 10 years, gives you the ability, I think, to teach with one more caveat, the same caveat I mentioned before. Do you have the skills to do it? So I want to talk about that idea. So I'm not sure if we can agree on the exact amount of time it takes to become a teacher, but we'll see if we can agree on some of the skills that it takes to become a teacher, because I think here is really the critical part. The knowledge that you have, and we agree there has to be some foundational knowledge, but the advanced knowledge that you have is probably not important to your skill as a teacher as your ability to share information and to get others to understand things. That's really the true skill of a teacher. When this commenter made this comment about I shouldn't be teaching macro, I felt like you're taking a little shot at me here. And I went to school actually to become a teacher, not a photographer. And I wanted to be a basketball coach. In fact, I coached sports teams all my life for my kids. I was a manager for 30 years. I worked in human resource. I was in training departments. I kind of feel like I'm qualified to teach other people. And while my style may not be right for everybody, and that's an important part of what we're going to talk about, I did feel a little offended by this. So yeah, maybe I got my guard up a little on these quick thoughts videos. It took me a couple days to record this because I think if I would have recorded it right afterward, it might have come across a little strongly. So now that I've had some time to think about the skills of a teacher related to photography, these are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. One, so in that first video, we talked about science versus photography, and that you could be not a lot of technical knowledge and still be able to produce great art. Here's the weird part. The amount of knowledge you have in the technical area beyond the foundations, your skill in creating the art may have nothing to do with your ability to then teach it. Think about the great photographers that you know. Some of them could be horrible teachers. We use this analogy in sports a lot, where we see these great players become terrible coaches. Sometimes because they can't relate to the players. What made them great as a performer or an athlete makes them a bad teacher because they become so unrelatable to who their audience is. And that can happen in photography. So again, the skill of a teacher can have very little to do with the skill of a photographer, which could also have very little to do with the expertise in a technical area. Now, could they all be related? Sure, you could have somebody who's really, really, really smart and a really great photographer and also a great teacher. But I would argue that you don't need to be great in the first two to still be a great teacher. You should be able to back up what you teach though. So to do that, like what are some of the skills of a teacher and what are the qualifications you need to have as a photographer? I think you need to have a pretty good body of work to teach. Like I think you need to have a resume out there. You need to be able to show like this is what I'm capable of producing. Do you have to be the greatest? No. But you have to have a solid foundation in the understanding and a solid foundation in the art that you are able to produce. But you also have to have these skills. And some of the skills, one of the most important, I think, is creating an environment where people want to be there and they want to absorb information from you. It could be charisma. It could be sense of humor. It really is more about the engagement and the ability to relate to your audience. Like that is foundational for me for teaching. And there's some other things. Being patient, being able to take complex ideas and make them very bite-sized and manageable, making sure people can understand those. Sometimes using analogies or demonstrations, but being creative in that process can be really, really helpful. And one of the most important things, and this is where a lot of people who are highly educated or highly technical in an area can struggle, is keeping it simple enough to understand, avoiding some of the jargon and avoiding some of the overly technical aspects until the student or the audience is ready to understand those things. That's a really, really, really big skill for teachers. Another thing that makes a great teacher or a mentor is style. So when we're talking, especially if we're in a specific genre like I am with wildlife photography, does my style resonate with my audience? Because if I have a belief, I can teach people my style, but if their style is in conflict with mine, we may struggle along that. And I've had this happen before. I've taken on a mentorship with somebody or established a relationship with somebody, and every now and then you find one that just doesn't click. And it's because stylistically, we just have different impressions of what we're looking for. I'm teaching one style, they want to gravitate in a different direction, and it's probably not the right match. So style can matter as much as your ability to teach people. So having that relationship where people see eye to eye with each other is really, really important. And then just two other thoughts around teaching that as I was making notes for this video. One is about expectations and being realistic with expectations, making sure that expectations align. That's really, really important. I have a whole idea that I have discussed with people in management around expectations and how important expectations are. I think the lack of expectation is one of the key reasons we have conflicts in everyday life. But for this video, we'll just say when you're teaching somebody, make sure the expectations align. And then the last part is, what is the responsibility of the teacher? So what should a teacher be responsible for? And I think there's a couple things here. One is we don't need to be an expert, but we do need to be responsible to the content we are putting out there. We have to make sure that it is factually accurate. And when it's not, we have to be very truthful with our students or audience that says, hey, I'm not sure. And one of the responsibilities is to say, don't teach above your knowledge level. So if I'm teaching beginners, let's make sure that we understand that that's what we're teaching. We're not teaching advanced concepts. Maybe I'm not qualified for that, and it's okay to say that. And that's one of the reasons I think it's important to have some years of experience before you go into this, because often, and I think we can all relate to this, one of the biggest dangers of teaching is trying to teach when there are things we don't know. Remember this idea around we don't know what we don't know. The whole Dunning-Kruger effect comes into play on this. When you don't have a lot of experience, there may be a lot of things you just aren't prepared to talk about, and you just haven't experienced it yet. So not teaching above your knowledge level is important, and I think that goes along hand in hand with experience. Now, before we wrap up the video, I do want to talk specifically about wildlife photography or different genres of photography and how they are very, very different. Some of the skill or expertise that I might need in an area could be different as a wildlife photographer than it is as, let's say, a studio photographer. See, I'm not going to be worried too much about lighting and angles and strobes and flash powers and stuff like that with the work that I do, but I am going to be very concerned about environments and habitats and behavior of wildlife. So the amount of knowledge that I have is going to be very different as a wildlife teacher as opposed to somebody else in another genre. So maybe my understanding of how a camera functions at a micro level or the electronics involved at the processor, maybe that's not as important as understanding how birds behave in the field and how I can use that behavior to improve my actual art. So that's my video for you today, and hopefully you understood my argument that to be a good teacher, you don't necessarily have to be a subject matter expert at a high level. Foundational understanding is important, but technical expertise, maybe you don't need that, but what you do need is the skills to teach others. Let me know if you agree. How much expertise do you need? You can talk that down in the comments, like, what do you think? In those years of experience, does that kind of make sense, like as a ballpark? Do you need less than 5 years to teach others? I don't know, it seems like a good number to me. To teach more advanced, do you need 5 to 10 years? Do you need a degree? The only teachers should have degrees from college. Is that true? I'm not sure I buy into that one. And then some of these concepts around what are the skills of a good teacher. You can let me know down, did I miss something? Is there a skill that I didn't include in this video? I'd be really, really curious as I continue to learn and continue to get feedback from others. I want you to know I really do appreciate your comments on the channel. Now, if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button. That'll push the content out to new people. I got a lot of playlists out there, so if you like my opinions, hit the Quick Thoughts playlist and you'll see a lot of videos just on my thoughts and photography in general. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.